Okay, and we're on the air. Welcome to another episode of the Napoleon and Gueco podcast. So, what's been going on with you, Gueco?
What's up, my man? Just, the same old stuff. Working on I've told you I've been working on trading and
Yeah,
getting better at that. So I've been doing that. Um, this week was a good week for me, education wise. And so, yeah, it's been a good work week, I guess. And haven't gotten much sleep, but I also have been pretty good at not having beers every day. So
that's
I feel
good.
pretty fresh still.
Yeah, I've probably been having way too many of those lately, but
Yeah.
yeah, so I know we were talking about our last episode, and I don't like to get too political on the show or try to stay nonpartisan, but I'm saying that our system is pretty much divided into two polar opposites. And so it's almost like you agree with the right on one issue, the left's like, shut up, fascist, but then you agree with the left on an issue, the right's like, shut up, communist. That
Yeah.
seems to be how it is, and that's why
Yeah.
it's kind of like,
Summed
you
it
know,
up pretty good.
I watched that first presidential debate this year, and like a lot of people who took polls who won, if they provided a third option saying we're all screwed, that's usually what would get the majority of the votes. But that was the thing is that I'd see a lot of comics talking about it. A lot of us could get a good laugh out of it. But then it's kind of like, I know you talked about how it's just kind of hard for the candidates to really be respectful of each other, it seems at this point. But the
Right.
problem is with our political system divided into two polar opposites, it almost seems like people on both sides will
Like a
start to,
battle.
yeah, they'll start to think, well, I've got the moral high ground. We have a right to hate on the other candidate like we do. Because, like, people will say, oh man, like, Trump's going to become a dictator if he gets reelected. We have a right to hate on him like we are because, like, he's the devil. And then,
Right.
you got Trump supporters going, oh, Biden's wrecking the country. He's the worst president ever. We have a right to attack him like we are. This is a do or die situation. He'll send us to World
Yeah.
War III, blah, blah,
It's
blah.
an existential threat.
That's the whole thing. And honestly, I know a lot of times this is just kind of what you get from watching the news. Is like I have an uncle that said the 7 o'clock news has to be better than the 6 o'clock news. So no matter what's going on,
They have
and
to
I think I
top it
brought
off.
this up in a previous episode, they have to have something to keep viewers attached.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like if they came on and they were like, "Oh, everything is sunshine and lollipops," nobody's going to watch that. They have
Right.
to
Right.
have something to get the audience hooked to keep them watching. And it's just
And
kind of like,
that says something about audience. Like we are so more attached to negativity than positivity. So,
we really are. That's my whole thing is that I hear all these people talking about, they get on me for being a pessimist, and I'm openly pessimistic about things. And it's kind of like I did bring up previously that there was a comedian that said, if you're positive and everything goes wrong, you just have all this disappointment, and you're like, oh, how could this have happened? But then if you are a pessimist and everything goes wrong, you just say, called it. But people jump on me for saying, oh, you always find the negative and stuff like that. And they're right. I'll openly admit to it. But a
right.
lot of these people will claim they're not like that, but then they'll
Right.
still find the negative and stuff. And I'm like, hey,
Right.
you're doing
Right.
that right
That's a
now.
good point.
And they'll
Yeah.
go,
Yeah.
well, no, 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 I'm just stating facts.
At least
And
you admit it, kind of thing.
right, because I'm not
Or
perfect, but
acknowledge.
I'm not gonna act like I'm somebody that I'm not. Like,
Right.
if I'm a mess, I'm just gonna straight up tell you, especially if I've had like 5, 7 beers, I will be like, yeah, I've had too much to drink tonight.
Yep. Well, me, I actually tend to err on the side of positivity. Like think positively, or at least I try because I always see, the angles of the topic or subject, whatever. And I know that nothing can is 100% one way or another. It's just the circumstance, the way you see it, your mentality. So I've always tried
Exactly.
to look at the positive, and I have been called like, "Oh, you're too positive. You're too like you. That's not how the world works," or blah blah blah. Um, but then when I'm more realistic, I guess when I tend to look at things more factual, then they say, "Oh, you're being negative." So it's like you can't win. You're either positive or negative. And what about just putting things on a playing field and saying, well, how can we improve on this? This is the way
Exactly.
things are. How can we improve? And see, the thing is, improvement doesn't have to be tenfold. You don't have to have, the way things are now, and then everything will be sunshine and rainbows tomorrow, and nobody will suffer, nobody will be homeless, nobody will have a drug addiction and all these
Right.
things. It's
It
just,
won't all get changed in one day.
but what about increase, being a positive change for 1%? Let's say your whole life adds 1% a better world, in your own, circumstance. Of course, we can't influence the whole world, but I mean your own world, your own lifestyle, community, whatever. You you increase 1% of just a little better, a little bit, everything just a little better. Imagine everybody did that. I mean, the change would be tenfold if we did that. But if we look at progress in, it's either better tomorrow or it's hell, then that's when we start to look at things as decaying, because we see the horizon as too far away. Why even bother to go for that? And it might not even be in our lifetime. People, that's something about parents and grandparents that I cannot attest to it, because I don't have any kids. But if I did, I would guess that my position in a lot of things would change, because I wouldn't just care about me. I'd care about the future of my kids. I probably put my situation second before theirs. So then it allows you to contribute in a small way, because you know that even a small contribution, maybe the way you raise your kids, can have an impact in the future for your kids, for your grandkids, for your great grandkids, and you're gone by then. So who cares, right? But I guess it's the incentive for us to better our world is the legacy, the next generation kind of thing.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I'm in the same boat as you. I'm not married, I don't have kids, but I do know people who talk about after they had kids, their whole perspective on life changed. And that's kind of what they call a paradigm shift. And it's
Right.
not just with this example. It's kind of like, the glass half empty, half full. When I was a kid and I really didn't get out much, and I'd hear all this great stuff about, oh, the world is your oyster, and hey, everybody gets a chance, blah blah blah. And then I got out in the real world and I just constantly got screwed over and knocked down all the time. And especially being homeschooled and not getting out much, I was really
That's a big
unprepared for
change.
what the real world had to throw at me. That's a
Right.
lot of the reason I'm a pessimist and I'll openly be
Yeah.
negative about things, because it's kind of like I really don't care what you say about that. It's just every time I will put anticipation or think, okay, we'll be positive. This is going to turn out right. 100% of the time, everything goes wrong for me. But that's just me. I cannot speak for everybody.
That's tough. Yeah.
There is a book about that called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where it does talk about people who shift their view on something. That's where the paradigm shift comes in, is that kind of like the yin and the yang that you kind of made as our logo for this YouTube channel.
Right.
There's like no right or wrong answer on that. It's just kind of your viewpoint. There was an example of them showing this weird painting, and it was a painting of this lady, but people were looking at it at two different ways. Some saw an 80-year-old lady, some saw like a 20-year-old lady,
Right.
but both of them thought, oh, like she's in college, she's real young. Then everyone else like, oh, she's probably in a retirement home. There was no right or wrong answer, but that everyone sees things a different way. And I kind of feel like there's not really one theory that works for everybody, because I know people, maybe like you, that are more positive about things. They get by very fine with it. But I'm just saying this whole thing about this pessimism thing, that has worked for me. That has
Yeah.
worked better for me. But
Yeah,
that's the
because you don't get hurt with the expectation of something going well and then being a
exactly.
failure,
We're
and
we're
then
just ready for things to happen, but at the same time there's other people who don't like to handle it the same way, and that's my whole thing about, I mean, of course I use social media to promote myself, but I honestly get turned off by a lot of these posts with all these motivational quotes that are like, reach for the stars, don't let go of your dreams, oh, my heart goes out to you. Like, I know that's like, it's friendly quotes and stuff like that, but I'm not going to go into detail, but I'll see people posting these like long quotes from these philosophers or these scholars. And, they'll be saying like, do what you want. Don't worry what anyone else thinks about you. I don't know. I take things too literally because, like, when I was in college, I loved the math classes the most because there was an actual answer. And one class I hated the most was philosophy and like English because it's almost all gray areas. And I just don't like that. Like,
Yeah,
I understand we do need both the yin and the yang. Like I'm saying, they're both not right or wrong. It's kind of like the two people that we have, like as far as like what side of your brain's dominant. Some use the side that's more for like emotion, and then the other people more use the side that's more logic dominant. And the problem that we kind of have, I am guilty of this too, and I've definitely tried to kind of change my view on it over the years, was that I kind of thought, well, I'm more logical. We need everyone else to be more logical. We
right.
need more people to think like me. But at the
Yeah,
same time, that is not the case. We need like even distribution. We need people who are emotion dominant. We need people who are logic dominant. It's kind of like the way we work on this. Like, we both have different tasks for this podcast. Like once we're done recording, I'll be editing, I'll be uploading it to YouTube, I'll be working on music and stuff. You're going to be working on thumbnails, you'll be doing the artwork, kind of like what you're saying. You're not crazy about editing videos. Like, I'm fine with it. I'm not highly artistic or I'm not highly creative when it comes to artwork, making the thumbnails, but you're great at that. And you say you enjoy doing that. So that's what I'm saying. The yin and the yang,
yeah,
they're both
yeah.
equally important.
Well, you spoke about the paradigm shift. Is that right? That's what you called it?
Correct. That's something that you could do, people who kind of shift their political views, and it does
Well,
happen.
I'll tell you what happened to me. I used to be, I don't know if negative is the right word, but I used to be a lot more cynical, like
Okay.
thinking that there was really no reason for anything. There was really nothing you could do to better your circumstances. In the big scheme of things, like yeah, you could improve, but ultimately, if you're not rich right now, the likelihood of you being rich later, it's minimal. That kind of thing, like using stats and numbers to back up my claims that life is, futile. I guess like there's not that much reason to be hopeful for, right?
Right.
But when I was 33, 32, I came across a book called The Science of Being Rich. I know it
Okay.
sounds corny as hell. And it's a book that was written in like the 1800s by this guy, William D. Wallace D. Wallace. Anyways,
Yeah.
he wrote a series of books, and I read the whole thing. And the thing is like, it's like you said, right? You base yourself in a mathematical type of, you know, brain function that you think math is good because there's an answer and there's an absolute and nothing can refute it. Whereas philosophy, it's in the air. You can say this, you can say that, and you can never come up with the right answer. But this book expresses that, for example, getting rich is a math equation, a science
Right.
based. There's a formula to it. And of course, it's not a formula that involves numbers, it's a formula that involves thoughts, the way you think. So, for example, one of the um, components of the equation is gratitude. So, being grateful, you know, allows you to get more stuff. So, if you want more things, it's kind of imperative that you are grateful for the things that you do have so that you attract things that you don't have. And and the way, I know it may sound really corny and like kind of dumb, but I really took that book to heart. I love the way that it was written. By the way, it's not just because it's not this. You remember The Secret, the book, The Secret, or they made a movie about it. Do
I
you
don't
remember that?
believe so.
No, it's very famous. You're probably gonna see it soon now that I mentioned it. It's one of those things where you're gonna see it. But anyways, that was based on this book, but this book is written, like I said, 1800s, and it really changed my life, my perspective. I had maybe $700 in my bank account when I read it, and I could say that I have a lot more now. And all I did was just change the way I think. But it took me years. It wasn't like I read the book and I was ready. I had to contemplate the words of the book and really what it really meant. And basically, what it really says is that it's up to you. It's up to you to think whatever you want. That's where the will comes from. You have the will to be
Right.
able to think what you want to think. And so if you want to think negatively, you will. And if you want to think possibly, now we are pre-assembled in a way. So being, for example, a pessimist might be part of your genes, of your
It
ancestry, like what you were born with, you
it's
know?
actually not. And that's
I
the
mean,
weird.
it may not be, it may be part of your environment, but there are people who are born with a different, I guess, genetic predisposure to certain things. Like if your family is negative, like around you, you're more likely to be negative. And you might say, okay, it's my environment. Well, why are your parents negative? Is that there's a gene
I mean, it's not necessarily
component to it?
that. And I don't know, maybe there's something within the ancestry, but at the same time, no, my family constantly talked about be positive, be positive. They were also, kind of control freaks too. So there were like so many restrictions I had where, I was kind of forced into it at a young age. But then also it's like it kind of got me to have more of a rebellious attitude at times. Like I'd do what they'd want, but I'd just be mad on the inside. Like I can't wait to move out here and just be on my own, do my own thing.
Right.
But at the same time, a lot of the pessimism just came from just having one disappointment, one failure after another, and it just got to where this is the real world. And that's kind of why I'll listen to these hard rock bands. They'll make songs about things that is just like, hey, this is horrible, life sucks, or like I hate the world. But then like, my mom will hear it be like, "Oh, why are you listening to this? It's just so negative." But maybe so, but the way I see it is I don't really see it as them just trying to find things to complain about. They're just simply singing about the real world. And that's the thing about what attracts the type of people they attract at these concerts is that these are other people who can relate to it. A lot of these songs, they write for people who relate to that stuff on a day-by-day basis. They're the ones listening to that. And then eventually, that's how they build up a fan base, get people to their concerts because they're all like, you understand it. You get where I'm coming from. And that was one of the thing about the that book, The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, is that one of those habits that they encourage, and I trust me, I'm still trying to work on adapting more of those habits, but one of them is to seek first to understand and then to be understood. And I feel like that's one that, look, I've been guilty of that. I'm not going to like just trash other people. I will always try to find the problem with myself first before judging anyone else. But I feel like that's the problem we have, especially with maybe our political system, is that instead of trying to understand why people on the other side are the way they are, it just seems that we try to just preach to the other person, like, how could you think like this? Like, how could you support this? Or how could you oppose this? And then you just try to talk maybe condescending to them at times. I mean, I don't really do that, but I, see people on the news or people on social media getting into those arguments. And
Well,
that's the whole thing. If you
that's
just
their job, though.
if you're being condescending to the other side, you're not going to win them over. You're not going to be like, hey, you're a horrible person for thinking the way you do, or maybe voting for the candidate you are. What do you think the other person's going to do? They're going to be like, oh, you're right. I'm horrible. I'm going to vote for your candidate.
Right.
No. And that's the whole point of it is that, like, but we kind of have this idea where, and I've been guilty of this too in the past, and in some ways, I'm still trying to work on it. It's that we think that our worldview is the right view. Kind of like saying, I used to think, well, I think more logically, everyone else needs to do that. But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, we need people to think differently. We need a wide array, or we need a
Yeah,
diverse
diversity, really,
range of
diversity wins
opinions
in
because
in
it's
nature.
kind of like there's so many things that If everybody just went in one direction, the whole world would be sideways. There's so many things that we have that are done from everybody contributing other things, like just projects. There's people who have
Yeah.
different ideas. If everyone thought the same way, it would be really dull and boring. But that's kind of the thing is I feel like some people have this mindset that they are so much like I'm better than you. Like when it comes to politics, like you're trash, you're garbage for thinking the way they do or being on whatever side you're on. Almost like they think they don't have to try to understand them. They don't think they feel like they don't have to have a serious conversation because it's like, well, I'm better than you. They're garbage. Why should I have to talk to them? But at the same time, like I'm not saying try to stoop to their position, but at least just maybe before you try to project all your thoughts and ideas, just listen to what they had to say or try to understand why they're coming from where they are. Maybe you will kind of have a partial paradigm shift as long as you are grounded on your principles and you kind of know where you are. But at the same time, you don't want to bring them down. You just want to be able to get on the same level or just kind of understand. Like I said, seek first to understand, then to be understood. I think that's what kind of creates a more positive environment, despite the fact that I'm more of a pessimist. Because examples in the book had to do more like on the business side, where someone would say, hey, like, what would you like for us to do for this business? Or what could we do to improve as a business? And they'd have other people talking, the other party talking, and then they would kind of bring up what they wanted. And it just kind of got to be where more of the time when that happened, when you try to open up to
More
the other
positive
side,
outcome.
there would be, be more, I don't know, like more alliances formed,
Yeah.
if you want to say that.
Well, just more creative stuff happening rather than
Exactly.
one
And
side
that's
fighting the other. And even when I said that even if your propensity to certain thoughts or negativity or whatever you want to call it is, even if it is genetic, even if it is, I'm not saying it is, but even if it is, you
right.
can still change it. It's just a
Oh,
matter
I
of
mean,
habit,
I
forming
could
the habit.
become positive like that if I wanted, but
Yeah.
it's just, it
But
has not
no,
worked
no,
out
that's
for
that's the
me.
thing. Not like that. No, it's a process. It's
Right.
a it's forming habits that will get you there. And basically it's the way you think, the way because it's like you said, um, you have a worldview, and we most all of us do, and we say our worldview is the right one, right? The correct. If everybody was like
A
me,
lot of
the
times
world would
by
be better.
default, we think that. I mean, I'm
But
not
how about
necessarily
this?
like
But
that anymore, but
maybe
yeah, I know
thinking
what you're
like this
saying.
is better, is to think everyone is um on a journey to a better understanding.
Of course,
And
you
you are
know,
and me as well. So it's not about you are wrong, I'm right. It's more about you are here and you're becoming more. And I'm here and I'm becoming more. So, and there are things that I have to fight against to become that person. Could be melancholy or negative thoughts or anger. Some people have a genetic propensity for anger. But
oh,
we
right,
all have those things that we have to fight. But it's not about this one's the right way, this is the wrong way. It's about you're becoming better, I'm becoming better. And I know it sounds like a little bit like kumbaya, let's all hug
right.
and be
Kind of
friends.
more like
But
the
if you
Michael
think that
Jackson
way,
song "Man
things
in the
get better
Mirror."
for you. That's the whole premise of the thing. It's not, you're not just doing it. It's kind of like, okay, you're gonna lie to yourself anyways. You're gonna have a certain viewpoint that may be right, may be wrong, whatever, but you're gonna fall in somewhere, right? In a category. Wouldn't you want that category to be the best one that can give you the most out of life, right? Wouldn't you choose? So if negativity is the best way for you to achieve the goals you want and to not be hurt when things don't go your way, and it works for you, then that might be the where you are right now, that allows you to have a good
Right.
time, to enjoy life.
Oh,
Maybe
I mean,
later in life you'll find the paradigm shift where you have to figure out another way, like what happened to me, because I did realize that it was me who needed to change. I couldn't change anything around me. It was all within me. That's
of
why my
course.
bank account said a certain number and now it says another number, because I changed. I changed the way I look at things. I stopped looking at the minimal things in life and just we
Yeah, yeah,
complain too much. Humans do, I think. We
of
complain too much.
course.
As things
That's
get easier and better, there's more to complain about, you know. you,
Right.
you don't really see, people in really dire circumstances, like, like we know this happening in other parts of the world or whatever, with hunger, kids with hunger and stuff. You don't see them complaining. You don't see them making a TikTok like, oh, my life sucks, I can't eat anything, it's
Exactly.
just us complaining about the menial things, like, oh, I don't have $1 million, I can't get a model to date me. It's like, okay, dude, like, you have 10 toes, I mean, sorry, yeah, you have 10 toes, 10 fingers, you have,
Yeah. You can
a
still
pair of
see.
eyes, you're
Yeah.
good to go, you know. So being grateful, I think it really, like, as simple and basic as it sounds, it's the base, it's the base level, and you don't have to be completely positive person to be grateful.
Right. Just,
You can just be grateful even if you have things that you're working on.
exactly. And I know what you're saying. And I mean, that's another thing I've definitely been guilty of is maybe sitting around complaining about stuff. Not necessarily like, am I making a bunch of TikTok videos just trying to, talk about, oh, my life is horrible. But, it's kind of like, I realize no one's going to save you. You have to save yourself. And you are right how ultimately you're the one who has to make that big step. No one else can make it for you, and no one can really force you to do that. But the whole thing about being a pessimist is that it's same reason that I stay single. Like there are definitely benefits to being an optimist, and there are benefits to being in a relationship. But it's like when I compare like optimism, pessimism, being single versus in a relationship, it just seems with me for pessimism and being single, the pros just outweigh the cons. And that's
Yeah.
ultimately how I decide that might be more of a logical standpoint. That's the thing is that even though I maybe am not exactly the same as far as when it goes to like positive thinking, I can still understand your viewpoint. I can still respect it. And I still realize we need people that think the way you do. And maybe we need people to think the way
Yeah.
I do, but we don't want everyone to. Like if the whole world was like
Right.
me,
Right.
it would be like the world would be
Yeah.
done.
I
Everybody
think
would be on
if
Mars
everybody
by
thought
now.
like me, though, we'd be all right. We'd be all right.
I think so. If they thought like you, but if they thought like me, no.
It'd be a funny world, I'll tell you.
Well,
We'd
yeah,
all be
'cause
laughing all the time.
no, everybody would leave and go to Mars with Elon Musk. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's one point that I wanted to bring up though is that I know a lot of people in college that were psychology majors. And we all know Sigmund Freud, who is the founder of modern day psychology, and
Yeah.
most of it is based on his
Mr. Cokehead.
writings, his books.
Mr. Cokehead.
Okay, I didn't know that about him, but
Oh,
it was
he dabbled, but before
well, that wouldn't surprise me.
before the drug was illegal, and they didn't know what it was, so he
Back
thought
when
it was
Coca-Cola
amazing.
put
But
it in their soft drinks.
yeah, yeah, and then he, I mean, at the end of his life, he's like, yeah, no, it wasn't a good idea. It was not what I thought it was. It
Of
has its
course.
negative effects. But at
Right.
the beginning, imagine how they felt for the first times they did that. But anyway, sorry, you were saying about, yeah, I actually, I think Freud is it shaped up what we believe psychology is. Sorry, but
Yeah,
but
just
I
say
don't
it
think
again.
I think a lot of his theories don't hold up to today's standards. I don't know. That's what I've been hearing from people who, everybody's a psychology major nowadays, so you hear that a lot, that Freud isn't
Yeah.
what everybody thought he was. But I do think he had probably the most revolutionary ideas in his time, and they still hold up, a lot of them. Uh,
Exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have gotten counseling and before, like back when I was in community college, because I talked about not getting out much growing up and just not fitting in and just kind of talking
right.
about,
Having a
hey,
hard time.
why do I come off weird to everybody? It was actually after maybe about 3 sessions, the counselor was like, hey, you seem just fine. Just kind of try to apply these exercises. He was very nice. So
Oh,
but there's
nice.
definitely aspects of psychology that will apply to everybody, like as universal rules. And he did have some good ideas, but at the same time, I feel like we can't really follow his rules to a T because that kind of goes back to other people having a different worldview. Is that, first of all, I've heard some people say that he pretty much based psychology off of his own life. And while some aspects might apply to other people, some might apply to most people. Not everything in his life, or nobody had the same life as he did. So we can't just say, oh, like, well, Freud went through that, so I must do this. No. Like, kind of like going back to what I said earlier. Everybody's different, and it's not like there's any right or wrong answers, but we can't really say that like, well, he thought this way, so we need to think this way. No. And that I also
Right.
like the point you made about, it's still a little bit outdated, although you said he had some good ideas at the time. That's one thing I think that we have a problem with as far as generations, because I know there will be Gen X's or maybe some boomers that have tried to help the millennials and the Gen Z's get through life or get through the real world. And although a lot of them mean well, I think a lot of them don't realize that the world has changed, like a lot of those decades since when they were young. Because a lot of times when my parents will try to give me advice on stuff like, oh, why don't you try doing this? I'm like, oh, no, they don't do it like that anymore. Or
Yeah.
stuff like everything's online, like it works this way. A lot of it has to do technology related, or just, a lot of people have shifted their ideas and opinions on stuff. And I
Right.
don't think they fully adapted to that. And a lot of times, they mean well when they're like, well, it used to be like that back in our day, but that doesn't really help the current generation. And that's the thing is that, that goes back to that other rule about seek first to understand, then to be understood. But it just kind of gets to where, especially boomers, they all want to be the first ones to talk and be like, well, I've been around, like, this is this way, this is that way. They want to talk to you. I'm not saying that all of them are like that, and I understand with age comes wisdom, but at the same time, it's just the way a lot of the previous generations are with technology compared to
Yeah.
us. Like, they're not fluent in it, they're not experts, but like they'll still think, well, we don't need all this technology. It's not necessary.
Yeah, but I would say that it's been such a we've had it for so long already, the social media and
Exactly.
the technology shift that even they are catching up. For example, like my mom does work on Zoom, right? Like she goes on Zoom and
Right.
has meetings and stuff like that. And my uncle who's older and stuff, he will like, be on FaceTime or Facebook or and all this stuff. So they have to catch up eventually. They can complain all they want. People used to think that as you get older that you don't learn, right? They say that kids learn really quick and adults don't, and it's a lie. It's a lie
Not
because
necessarily.
yeah, because the human brain can create synapses all the way to death. So you can still learn and adapt your brain for new circumstances. It's just about, the way what I was saying earlier is the way you think. If you think that you don't learn when you're older, then you're not going to learn when you're older.
Exactly.
But if you do see the truth that you do learn when you're older and that you have the capability to learn even more things than younger people, you would, because you have the idea that you can. So that's where the basic thinking process is, like seeing your thinking patterns, because there are patterns, and I think 20s 30s, I think it's when we are the most negative, I guess, like especially in our 20s, because we just came from the teenage years and we're in this world where we have to figure out how to make money, how to get a life,
Exactly.
whatever.
And just everything just keeps getting more expensive, which just constantly puts more pressure on like, man, I gotta have this much money by this day, or I gotta be making all of this money now. And that's kind of the problem is that, inflation hadn't really helped at all, but it's
But it might be all part of like an evolutionary thing, because think about it. Okay, so an argument is could be made that people in their 20s, 50, 60 years ago, or in their 20s, could get married and afford a house and get married, in their, let's say, 22,
right.
23, be able to pay the mortgage, have a car, and the picket fence
Yeah.
lifestyle, right? With one income. That's the argument. And that now a 20-year-old, 22-year-old is basically broke, is basically a high school kid with no real skills, even though they're graduated maybe college. They don't really have prospects for a job that's going to pay enough for them to do
They
the
don't.
same that a 20-year-old would, right?
They usually have
But
to rent, have two or three roommates just to get
right,
started.
right. But maybe it's just the scale moving up, because back in the day people used to live up to 60, 50 years old. I mean, that was the average age, right, for people. Now it's like 70, 80, so people are living longer. So it would make sense that now teenage years are reverted back. So now when you're 22, and they've done this like studies or whatever where they do see that people are growing up or maturing a lot slower. But it makes sense that we would if we're going to live longer. Because what, you want to be an adult at 22 and then be an adult for 50, 60 years? Or does it make sense that society would kind of make it that these people are still having to live with their parents, having to live more of a younger lifestyle and not be mature enough? And then by the time they're 30, now they can get out of the house, and it's just kind of pushing the clock, as it were.
Right. That definitely makes a decent point. There's ways that both sides are guilty on that because, it's kind of like going back to what I said is that maybe the older generations don't really understand how, like, cost of living's not the way it used to be. Like, the world's changed a lot, how they'll think, well, why can't you do this? I was able to do it when I was your age. They kind of maybe don't have an understanding of what the Gen Y or the Gen Zs are really having to go through like with the way the world's changed. But at the same time, I feel like the Gen Y and Gen Zs are still guilty in a way that they have this stereotype about, how they say it's like, when you're like at 18 or 20, you're at the age where you know everything. It's kind of like what you were saying is that you have the younger generations that there's definitely principles or things you will learn that come with age, that come with
Yeah.
maturity. And a lot of people, especially when they're teenagers, they don't want to listen. They're like, oh no, I know everything. I know what I'm doing. I've been guilty of that too. But that's also another thing that we talked about. Like, you have to make mistakes in order to kind of know your place. And it's really hard to improve as a person if you don't have failures. So I think, in a way, like, yeah, you're going to make mistakes. Just be ready for it. Of course, you don't want to be foolish, but there are times that you have to be okay with getting out of your comfort zone. You have to make mistakes in life, and you will make mistakes, and you just have to be ready for it. You can't be afraid of them. Sure, you don't want to be foolish and just make like really dumb decisions, but at the same time, you have to be able to go out of your comfort zone. And that was a problem I was hesitant on for a while because, I was pretty much raised very sheltered. It's like my parents, all they wanted me to do when I grew up was just like go to work, then come home and like read the Bible and go to church on Sunday. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, it would just keep me in an echo chamber. And I
It's
just
not
feel
what you
like
wanted.
that goes back to like us developing this default mindset or this group think is that there's no like wrong answer to that, but like the group think will program us to think, oh, everybody needs to be like us. And, my family gave me all these harsh warnings about, oh, if you start drinking, you'll become an alcoholic, get 3 DWIs, have your driver's license suspended. I mean, sure, they're right. That stuff happens. But at the same time, like when I started drinking, I like luckily there were people I knew who were kind of watching out when they knew I didn't know how to handle alcohol. At the same time, like when I just started hanging out at bars and just kind of started drinking, just kind of sitting back and just kind of getting more familiar with different types of environments, that's what eventually led me to having some paradigm shifts. Like,
Yeah.
okay, there's certain things that I understand that I didn't before. And I'm not encouraging everyone to be an alcoholic, but in a way, I'd say alcohol has really helped me on just my worldview or my maturity level and just better understanding people in general, if that makes sense in a weird way.
Yeah, no, it does. It's a rite of passage also, in a way, drinking. I mean, you do it when you're of age, and then you get to see in some ways the real world, because that's where people get a little more honest, show their true colors a little more when they're relaxed and drinking. And you get to see people in a more, I guess, raw context than you would in church or school or whatever, where people are just kind of walking on eggshells everywhere. I'll also say that this whole idea that this idea of negativity, like this way of thinking, first of all, the FBI knows that most people are 70% negative, and they use it to manipulate. And when they're interrogating people or trying to solve some kind of crime or whatever it is that they're doing, when they're doing their job, it's always in their back of their mind. People are 70% negative. And so, influencers, the public speakers, public figures, they use that to make it seem like the world is a dangerous place everywhere you go.
Kind
There's
of like
always a danger
yeah,
right next
just
door.
like on the news.
And America has this infatuation, and I would even call it a fetish with safety. Everything has to be safe before it's out there, right? FDA approved and has to meet the guidelines and everything. And, in a way that's good because it's preventing people from exposing people from unnecessary dangers. But at the same time, like the world is not that dangerous. You walk into a bar for the first time, you might be a little scared, but then you realize it's just people like you having a good time or
Exactly.
whatever.
But that was
And
the
there
whole
are places that are dangerous, but you're
oh,
not
of
going to encounter those on a daily basis because
course.
people are good. Actually, I would argue that people are good for the most part. There's only a few dangerous people in relation to the population, right? In terms
Right.
of percentage. And if that wasn't the case, we wouldn't even be alive, right? Or we would be,
Exactly. Because it's kind of like, you see all these incidents happening on the news. And I mean, they're not wrong. These things do happen. There are active shooters, there are stabbings and stuff like that. There's like, hit and runs on the streets.
right.
But at the same time, it's kind of like what you said. The world
It's a
is not
minority.
it's not as dangerous of a place as the news makes it sound. But like my parents, they'll watch the news all the time, and then like they told me growing up, like don't ever go to bars, don't ever drink. Like you'll have all this stuff happen to you, or oh, be careful, you might get beat up if you go to a bar and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So it's kind of like that, but that's a problem. There are people I know who are still in that echo chamber and they
Right.
still have that view. And I'm not saying like I'm not encouraging them to like, hey, you need to start drinking, but it's just kind of like it's not what
It's
I was
better to
told.
not listen to others as much. It's better
Right,
to listen to yourself,
right,
to have a decision and have some conviction about the decisions you make, that you might make the wrong choice, but at least you are making the choice. Not because they told you not to make the choice, you don't make it.
right.
It's like you decided to do something, and if there was some bad consequence, then you deal with it because you decided to do it. You take responsibility, basically.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
like I said, I've come across plenty of those encounters where I'm like, okay, yeah, they were right telling me like this was a bad idea, but I still did it. I brought it on myself. I'll take responsibility, but at the same time, just from having that experience of that failure or having
You
that
progress. Yeah.
problem, that mindset, or those consequences stay with me. And then I think, well, we know what not to do when we are in a similar situation. But it's also
Yeah.
like my last job, they'd send me on the road. I'd be traveling to all these different cities. And then my mom would call up, be like, oh my gosh, you don't want to go to like so and so because we saw on the news that there were like two shootings over there, or like three people got killed at this place in that city. Like, oh, just be careful. Like, they'll murder you, like, if you walk out on the streets. And I was like, for real? Like, almost every time they would warn me about all these dangers of certain places. And then I would go to that place, and sure, like they kind of have this rule, like if you're just walking around outside, just kind of just stare into space, stare at the ground, mind your own business. And most people won't really mess with you. Like people won't randomly walk up and just like stab you or beat you up for no reason. Almost
Yeah.
every time it is like that person was causing some type of horseplay. They were causing some shenanigans. That's really what I guess they didn't really quite understand is that it's almost like when I was in Virginia and I was going to, they have a metro train that kind of goes in between like, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Maryland. And then my mom was like, whatever you do, don't take the metro train into Maryland. Like, we've heard about some shootings in Baltimore. And I was like, okay, Baltimore is like at least an hour drive from me just crossing state lines on like the west end of Maryland. Like,
Right.
what do you think? I'm just going to cross state lines and there's all these fully automatic machine guns that are going to come at me? I
Yeah.
mean, come on, man.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Yeah, and the problem with that, who wins that after all of that, like with people living in this kind of fear and this kind of news induced propaganda is big companies, because when people are fearful, when they're negative thoughts, they shop more, right? There's people building bunkers for themselves. So for doomsday scenario, you know how much a bunker would probably cost to build?
I've
Can you
looked it up.
imagine
It's at least half
stocking
a
it up
million
and
dollars.
actually having it ready for a, maybe not a nuclear bomb, but maybe some kind of attack, like a bomb, like a regular bomb or something? Yeah, you might survive, but what the hell are you gonna do with your bunker by yourself? You know, like how long are you expected to live there, and how much did you invest in that thing? Um, so
Exactly. Because it's weird because I do have a relative who he is into a lot of conspiracy theories and he called up was saying, "Oh my gosh, you better get some backup power generators, survival food, like gas masks." He's saying, we're about to go to nuclear war. We're gonna get bombed and you gotta have like all the survival tools and stuff like that." And my dad just straight up told him, okay, if that war does happen, if we get bombed, he's like, just let them bomb us. Like,
yeah.
he's saying he'll watch these movies where they'll have these apocalypse scenarios and they have this one guy that's like fighting the whole movie. He goes through all this crap. And then at the end of the movie, it's like almost everyone else gets wiped off. And he's like, hey, I survived. But then he's just like at a world
Now
that's
what?
empty or he's living in a cave and it's
Yeah,
like, okay, great. What are you going to do at this point? It's like you're going back to the beginning of time. You're a caveman.
yeah, and you're alone. Do you remember the incident where there was a very real, or credible nuclear alarm for Hawaii from North Korea? Do you remember that?
I think
Maybe
I heard
five,
something
6 years
about
ago,
that.
5 years ago. Yeah. Well, I was in Hawaii when that happened. So I come to work because I get up like it over there. When I worked over there, it was early. It's like 7:30. So the news had just broken up about that, and it was a real alarm. People were actually bunkering down and things like that. And I show up to work, and my boss comes out. He's an older guy. He's funny as hell, and he's a really good guy. He comes out of the store and he sees me. He's like, "There's a bomb coming! There's a bomb coming!" And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, he's like, "Yeah, there's a nuclear bomb coming right at us from North Korea." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna need a little coffee to talk about that." And that's exactly what I said. I wasn't even trying to make a joke or anything. That's what I said. I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna need a little coffee," because that was my kind of my routine, is walking into the tennis shop and getting a cup of coffee. And I did get a cup of coffee, and it did cross my mind that there might be a bomb coming, because it was a real threat, and I was okay with it. I honestly, I wasn't like, oh, well, I'm gonna go. Like, I'm just gonna go where everybody goes ultimately. Like, I'm not this like Jason Bourne person who's going to like figure out how to escape the freaking nuclear holocaust where nobody else is has figured it out. It's like, no, I'm just a guy who hopefully, if this happens, survives, and if not, then I was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. But that's the thing. That's the way I see it. Is like, there's nothing I could do there. Why am I going to stress? And why am I going to stress? And even if it's my last minutes of life, why am I going to spend them in fear and yelling and crying?
You just want to panic through your last 30 seconds.
Exactly. Like that doesn't. I mean, can you imagine like being on a plane that's going down? That is a horrible, like probably a horrible feeling. But even then, it's like, okay, I got in this plane. There is a chance that it might go down. Very small, very, very, very small. But I'm here and it's happening. Yeah, just call, if you can, call your friends or your family, your parents, whatever. Tell them you love them. That's all you can do. Just leave on a light note, because
Eh, Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, these are definitely very sad situations that don't get me wrong. I definitely get paranoid. I still get nervous when I go on flights, but it's kind of like what you're saying. And it's definitely something I still have a problem with is that there are things I'll get wrapped up in, things I'll be like getting worried about a lot of the time. And there have been people who are like, there are books and stuff where they talk about if you have no control over it, then you're just wasting your time worrying about stuff because it's not doing any good. It's not making the situation any easier. It's not fixing anything. It's almost like I remember when I was a teenager and I used to follow politics like crazy. And I was saying, oh my gosh, can you believe what's happening with our government? Can you believe what's going on in Washington? And then this guy who's a coworker at the time was like, yeah, he's like, I can't say I'm happy with the way things are, but what are you going to do about it? It's like, there's not much you can do about it unless you run for office. It's like, why
Right,
would we just like waste our time sitting here complaining about it? Because it's
right.
not going to change anything. It's not going to make anything any better. So what's the point of just
But you know
wasting
what?
our,
You know what
yeah,
is actually a point, or not a point, but a reason to complain. It's actually a bonding thing if you think about it. It's the way, humans, we bond, because imagine you feel like very scared and I'm scared as well, and we talk about it. It's a good thing for us because we can comfort each other and
right,
create a bond, and if we are a community, fight together against a threat or figure out a solution. So it has its positive outcome to be negative, like to share common like complaints, because it makes a bond. We're trying to bond, but it's better. I think it's better to bond in another way. That's what I realized is, like, sometimes when I would complain to people about something, or just say like, oh man, what a crappy weather we had yesterday, it was raining, you couldn't do nothing, and there was traffic, and then the other person's like, yeah, it sucked, blah blah blah. But I realized what I was doing is just trying to connect with the person, just trying to have some kind of mutual, appease each other mutually or something.
right,
But as soon as when I realized that that's what I was doing, that was my kind of ultimate goal. Subconsciously, I made a conscious effort to stop doing that and then try to bond in another way. Try to bond by asking them questions, maybe, using the time more creatively, and try to get somewhere, or play a game of some kind or something like that. That's much, in my opinion, a much better way to bond with someone than to complain and
probably.
talk
If
about
you
how
share
shitty things
mutual
are.
interests on movies or TV, video
Right,
games.
right. Just
No, I understand. And a lot of
make jokes.
times, the way I see it, anytime I bond or start to create an acquaintanceship in the least with another person, or at least mutual respect, we might talk about stuff that we don't like and maybe we're opposed to it. Almost every time, it is not about us complaining to each other, or it's
Right,
like it doesn't really come off in the same tone as a
right, right.
typical complaint. We could talk about,
It
oh
was more
man,
like
this
a
sucks. I
conversation.
hate this. But like
Yeah,
we'll talk about, man, this is I'm not a huge fan of this. It's,
right.
it's not really my thing, or hey,
Mm.
it's just I don't get why other people like this. And then someone will be like, I know, right? And then
Right.
that's
It's
what
like
starts a
finding common ground.
conversation. But it's not like we're just upset about everything, or we're
Right.
just mad about everything. And but see,
No, yeah, I
that's
get it.
that's the
Yeah.
problem. That's kind of like what the news does to a lot of people, though.
Yeah.
And that's the way I see it, is that, and people try to tell me this as a teenager, but I didn't want to listen because, I knew everything at that age.
Right, of course.
But people try to tell me, like, look, it's good to keep up with current events. It's good to just be
Right.
aware of what is going on, but don't dwell in it and don't let it take over your life and just cause you to possibly spend time worrying when you could spend it being productive, doing something else, such as this podcast.
Right. But ultimately, like, they say, it's good for you to keep up, but don't dwell. I would say it's not good to keep up. There's no use for it. As the only good use for keeping up with the news and keeping up with current events, the only good thing that can come out of is that when you're talking to someone, you know what they're talking about. That's
Right?
it.
Or maybe
And
you
that,
can make a comedy joke based off of it.
or maybe, yeah, something. Well, that's more like if you're using the material. But I would argue that you don't have to watch the news every day for one news joke, right? You could just watch one episode and get a joke from there. But in any case, what I'm saying is that there's really no usefulness to that. But there is the usefulness of talking about it with others and knowing what they're talking about when they're talking about that. And that
Right.
is a big thing for humans. Think about it. Look,
Being
first is
relatable. And
first
that's
is
a huge role
water,
of comedy.
food and water, right? That's like our first need, right? Food and water. And then shelter, right? Because we don't have it, we might die of exposure, cold, whatever. You could argue that sexual reproduction is one of the next one, I guess.
I
You know,
don't
it's
agree.
but
I'm living
no,
proof
well,
we don't need
I'm
that
saying in
to
general for
survive.
humans, like in general, like I mean, you need water and food, right? And then you have the urges, the sexual urges, whatever. Like you don't have to actually multiply, but that's a big thing, a component of your needs. If we're talking about a hierarchy of needs,
Like the Maslow's hierarchy.
right? And then the next one, once you have food, water, shelter, the next one is belonging, belonging to the group.
Right.
That's the most important thing. So, having said that, go figure that everyone watches the news because it's very important for them to know what's going on so that they can bond with others and belong. Because if everybody's talking about the news and you don't know what's going on, then you're left out. You're not part of a
Exactly.
group.
And that's why we have social groups. That's why we have areas where people of the same mindset get together. Of course, and that kind of brings us back to a previous episode when we talked about how when people don't feel included, when people don't feel like they belong to any group or don't fit in anywhere, that's what sometimes
Yeah.
causes them to snap. And
Or
that's
join a cult or something like that.
something like that, or that who knows,
Something
like
extreme.
they could start getting illegal firearms and
Yeah.
could like shoot up a school or a college campus. In fact,
Yeah.
that's usually the backstory of a lot of those active shooters, is just they didn't find anywhere,
Loneliness.
there was nowhere they belonged to. They were just shut out. We're like, man,
Snap.
this isn't fair.
I think with that we leave we leave on
Think
that
so.
note. A
We
little bit
left on a
dark,
kind of
but
definitely talked about
trying to
some
keep it
maybe
light.
dark subjects, maybe stuff that wasn't the most comforting. But at the same time, this is what the show's about. We're here to
Yeah,
talk
it's
about
fun to talk about
everything.
this stuff.
So we
Yeah,
definitely have to touch the waters eventually. So we'll either get our feet
yeah,
wet and then eventually we'll just like slide right into the water, possibly.
yeah.
As
And
long as the
hopefully
water,
our opinions express the positivity in it all, like the fact that we don't get bombarded with this and have no solution. We have a solution for the things that we're dealing with, and so we're becoming better. And that's
of
kind of like
course,
what I like to be the podcast about is we're all becoming. So let's become something great all together.
of course. And if you're going to be, why not? That's what we should go for.
Yeah,
And
you're
that's
gonna be a,
why
a a host of a game show one day, and I'm gonna be a highly profitable trader. So we're
I
on the
hope
way.
so. Let's hope that happens. Well,
Yeah, man.
with that being said, the only way to find out if we keep progressing more towards our end goals is to keep following us and to keep listening to the Napoleon and Gueco podcast.
Yeah, thanks for joining, man. All right,
Yeah.
take care, everybody. Peace
All
out.
right. Peace. I hope you really enjoyed this video. Check out some of the other content we have on this page and make sure to subscribe so you are always notified when new content becomes available on this channel. And I will see you in the next video.